Great. Well, it is super fun for us to be here today. And how I want to start is by acknowledging some of our partners and sponsors. And as you'll notice, the University of Denver is one of our partners. And it's one of the first places that we've been able to roll out our software. And so it's just been invaluable to us to get great feedback and learn from you all as we are continuing to develop the technology. It's also our pleasure to work with a variety of other clinical sites, training groups, and I want to acknowledge the support we received from both the Anthony Casey Foundation and IDA. So actually before I jump into this, so just to give you a flavor of the arc of our presentations, I'm going to start off and talk a little bit about the motivations for our work. And give a kind of a snapshot of some of the technologies, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Tad Hirsch, who is a designer and is going to share both sort of how he thinks about approaching mental health and addiction treatment as a designer, as well as some of the specific features that have gotten built into our software as part of that. And then Sri Narayanan is our Chief Scientist Officer, and he is going to kind of expand the view of what could be possible with these types of technologies. So moving even beyond psychotherapy, what are other applications in this behavioral science domain. So this is probably not news to this group, but mental illness and addiction are pervasive and incredibly impactful problems. 20% of Americans, about 60 million Americans, have a diagnosable mental illness or addiction at any one time. And some colleagues of mine at the University of Washington conduct a global burden of disease study that is, as it sounds, a global study of the impact of health-related problems. And it turns out, as they have done this study, that almost 30% of the global burden of disease is attributable to mental illness and addiction. Here in the U.S., we spend approximately $8 to $10 billion a year on approximately 100 million counseling and psychotherapy sessions as one route to try and treat and address the problems of mental illness and addiction. The challenge is that what we know from the research literature is that in the community, in the real world, the quality of therapy can be incredibly variable. So this is, what we're looking at here is some data from my colleague John Baer, who's at the Puget Sound VA Hospital. He did a large study of community addiction treatment providers and recorded over 800 sessions from them. He had people code all 800 sessions. And so each one of those blue dots represents a therapist, and it is their average empathy rating on a scale from 1 to 7. This comes from a motivational interviewing fidelity measure. And so we can see that there is tremendous variability. At the top end of this scale, these are therapists that, according to the measure, demonstrate a deep understanding of the client's worldview and are getting the meaning behind what their client is saying. And at the low end, these are therapists who have no interest in their client's worldview and little to no attention to what their client is saying. How is this possible? So in part, this certainly reflects some of the tradition in addiction treatment of having a somewhat more confrontational style. If you listen to the counseling sessions of these folks kind of down here on the lower right, they sound a little bit like Dr. Phil. But I guarantee you that every single one of these 189 therapists is intending to do good by their client. And so if this is suggesting that, and we have a lot of other research suggesting that empathy is a good thing. More empathy is more better, right? So how is it that we can be in this situation? And one of the things that we know about counseling, it's a skill, right? Many of you are here, or almost all of you are here learning to do this skill, getting trained in it, right? But counseling is a very different type of skill from other traditional skills like learning a musical instrument, or playing a sport, or even something like surgery. And what's different is the feedback that we get, right? That if you are playing a sport or you are learning a musical instrument or even learning how to do surgical procedures, you get immediate feedback on whether what you have done is appropriate, led to the right outcome. You either played the notes correctly or you didn't, the shot went in, it didn't. You either got the needle inserted where you wanted to or you didn't. And this is a fundamental challenge. And so Danny Kahneman, who is a cognitive psychologist, kind of captures it this way, right? That the acquisition of skills requires a regular environment, an adequate opportunity to practice, and rapid and unequivocal feedback about the correctness of thoughts and actions. And historically, I would say this has been a massive challenge for counseling. Learning how to do counseling and training, right? We record sessions, we have supervisors, they observe performance, they give feedback on the performance. But even that is challenging. And once you're out in the real world, functionally for the vast majority of us, there's no feedback. And so this is really this is really kind of the core fundamental driving issue that Lyssn has been trying to tackle, and Lyssn is a university spin-out, so Shri and I have been chipping away at this for the last 10 years from our university day jobs, and in the last year and a half, Lyssn came into being as a way to try and get this out into the real world, and honestly to interact more directly and closely with folks like yourselves who are in the process of learning, being trained, and doing supervision. And so there's a host of technologies, some of these you may recognize the names, some you may not, that are allowing us to rapidly quantify aspects of the spoken language interaction of counseling and provide feedback. With our ultimate goal being, can we provide that performance-based feedback that's going to help maximize therapists in their ability to help their clients. So just to give you, I'm going to give a kind of the high level, I'm the 30,000-foot flyover view, and then Tab's going to drill down into some more details of the particular software. But these are some of the key steps in terms of one of the fundamental problems is that the raw data of counseling is varied and messy, right? I mean, what is it? It's words. It's not only the words themselves, but it's how the words are said. It's not only that, but it's nonverbal behavior that you might see, facial emotions, gesture, posture. And then it is that dynamic interaction of how that goes back and forth, how the kind of session evolves over time, and you dynamically respond to your client or patient. And so some of the key steps for us in terms of how do we actually go from a session to feedback is that there are these key speech signal processing tasks, right? So if we are thinking about, we have a recording, a digital recording of the counseling session that has that key information in it, we need to be able to identify when someone is speaking, when they're not speaking. We need to identify how many people are speaking, and at each moment in the session, is this speaker A, is this speaker B? That's called speaker segmentation or diarization. In addition, once we know that there's speaker A and speaker B, they have very specific roles, right? One of these people is the counselor, and one of these people is the client, and so we have automatic ways of identifying who's who. And then automatic speech recognition, as well as quantifying paralinguistic information such as vocally encoded arousal, which is what we often hear as pitch, and when someone's getting more upset, we say that their voice is rising. Well, we can measure that. Those all go into kind of fancy machine learning models that are trained to learn things like empathy, and as well as different types of questions and reflections, and then a report to provide feedback to therapists and trainees. So one of the first chunk of our work, and the kind of front end of what Shri and I got started 10 years ago, was really this kind of proof of concept idea of, is it even possible to automatically quantify information and be able to predict codes, these kind of quality indicators. And so our work has strongly focused on motivational interviewing, and each one of these each one of the names on the left is a particular code from a motivational interviewing fidelity coding system. There's 3 different models that are color-coded. I won't go into the details on those. These are machine learning models that are very common and well known to computer scientists and engineers, and really, really not known to psychologists, counseling psychologists, and others. And so that's been part of our work, is really kind of bringing together this interdisciplinary team science. And the main thing to note here is that we're hoping that these machine-based predictions would line up with what humans do. And so that dotted black line is essentially, that's the human benchmark, how well a human-trained coder can identify each one of these. And so, this was original kind of proof of concept, but very encouraging work that we're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And particularly for things like confront, the size of the dot is scaled to how many instances of that code we have. We didn't have that many confrontations, and both humans and machines had a difficult time identifying it. So we have more work to be done, but that was an encouraging first step. Kind of fast forward 8 years, this is our current little GIF of our current motivational interviewing feedback report. So given a recording of a session on motivational interviewing, our system can automatically generate this report. If you're familiar with motivational interviewing, you might recognize some of these terms. So these are different quality metrics that motivational interviewing specifies. So they're interested in things like percentage talk time, how many questions are you asking, how many reflections are you asking, different types of questions and reflections, how empathic you are. In addition, we have this kind of elastic timeline of the entire session, where each one of those little bars is a talk term from either the therapist or the client, and that's linked to the automatic speech recognition transcript of the session. And I think Tad's going to have maybe some more glimpses of that. In addition, one of the other things is that it's not only the ability to have this engine that can kind of take one session, run through all these steps, and generate one report outcome. We also need an easy way to interface with that information and organize that information. So another significant piece of what we have worked on is this cloud-based HIPAA-compliant platform. And so this is a platform, a web-based platform where you can stream audio or video directly into the cloud. It has a nice dashboard. You kind of organize information about patients and therapists and supervisors can be assigned to different trainees. At one of our sites, we've linked it up with their primary outcome measures, so you get this little spark line graph of how they're doing on this outcome measure. And then the platform also enables reviewing a session. Part of our interaction actually with folks here at the University of Denver helped to lead to the ability to annotate sessions. So if you want to leave notes, and you can time link those notes, so if you have a session, you can leave the session, and you can go in and click on 3 minutes and say, this is where the client brought up suicide, and I was not expecting it, I really didn't know what to do, can we please talk about this? Your supervisor will get an indication in their dashboard that there's a new note for them on this session. And when you guys have a supervision session, boom, you kind of pull up exactly, you'll see the note in the session, and you can immediately jump to that portion of it. One other thing that we have is a searchable transcript of the session, so that if you didn't put in that note, and you're like, but there was a point where they were talking about drinking, and where was that? You can search the transcript for drinking and try and find that. And these are all ways, at a very high level, we're thinking about how do we decrease the distance between the performance of counseling and your ability to reflect and interact with that. Right? And traditionally that has been more challenging, and we're trying to figure out ways that technology can bridge that gap. One of our more fun and maybe perhaps slightly wacky projects is what we affectionately call ClientBot, but it is a chatbot for practicing skills. So this is a chatbot, so it is a computer algorithm that's been trained on just patient language and transcripts. So it's trained to talk like a patient. And then you can chat with it in text-based chat and practice particular skills. So if you basically wanted to, now we're going to practice making reflections. You can chat with our client bot, and simultaneously it's letting you know, it's tagging each of your interactions with a particular code. So, and it's tracking what you've been doing. So ask an open question, then a closed question, then you made a reflection, and so it might give you a little reminder. Now try to use a reflection. And so it's just ways of, and again, as I put in the title here, sort of like practicing scales for counselors, right? There are these really low-level things that we need to do. That's kind of the performance of our behavioral skills as counselors and clinical psychologists. And are there ways that we can enable just the practice of that? Let's practice reflection. Let's practice open questions. Let's practice making empathic statements. And I think that is the point where I'm going to hand it over to my friend and colleague, Tyler.
Thank you. Time to do everything. So, thanks everyone. So, yeah, I'm a designer. Any other designers here? No? Perfect. So this will be fun. So I don't have deep experience in counseling or mental health. So working with this team has been like hugely educational for me. And so what I bring to bear on the work that we're doing is a kind of focus on the experience of people who are actually engaging with our technology. You need this? Okay. Whether that's a clinician who is using it for review, whether it's a supervisor, or whether it's a patient or a client. And so that's really my focus. And so what I want to talk about a little bit today is sort of how design or as a designer, I approach working in an area like therapy, and how it's actually quite different than the ways that designers are taught to work, in the ways that we typically work in professional practice. As some of you, or many of you may know, there's been a huge interest in the design community in the last handful of years in developing technologies to address mental health issues. So open up your app store, you will see many options there. And so there's a lot of software work, there's increasingly architectural work with trying to design spaces that are meant to be more comfortable perhaps for people who are experiencing various kinds of mental distress. There's a range of work. Most of it doesn't really map well to clinical practice. It's of limited utility for practicing therapists. And what you hear when you talk to clinicians, if you're a designer trying to develop technology, is like, it seems like a lot of the people out there just don't quite get it, which is true. And the reason they don't quite get it, I think, actually gets to the core of what design typically is. So if you go to design school, which I don't recommend, but if you do, you will learn some version of this chart. And what this chart is telling you is, okay, so in the world there are two kinds of things. There are businesses and or institutions, and they have goals. So for example, a business might be really interested in getting people to look at advertising and get up all their personal data. And then the other kind of person is a consumer or a user. They're also known as people, but we don't use that language. And they also have goals, which might be looking at all the cat photos there are. And the job of the designer is to somehow bridge these two interests, hopefully without violating the law or one's personal code of ethics. And if that's your model of how to build technology, what you get are things like lots and lots of apps that may or may not be interesting to a potential user. You may or may not be good at getting people to give up their personal data, but that's kind of the end purpose. And it's probably not going to fit in a clinical setting or really any kind of human service setting. And that's because human services typically are much more complex in the kinds of stakeholders that they have to engage with and the kinds of constraints that they're operating under. Right? So this is what's called a socio-ecological model developed by Brenner. Who's a name that's familiar to many, that's important to me. But one of the things that I have done for my community is try to bring that model into design as a way of thinking about how we do design work. And so what it basically is telling us that as designers, we need to be thinking across several levels or several dimensions, right? There's obviously the individual, which has to do with what the needs and capabilities and experiences are of somebody who's directly touching our product or software. Interpersonal aspects of it, so in the case of therapy, we don't want to just think about what the therapist is doing and saying and feeling, but they're usually involved with at least one other person in a session or in supervision. We think about institutional arrangements, so typically, if you're a therapist and you're operating in a clinic or at a university, that institution will have a set of requirements that are going to shape how one might experience or use the technology. We think about the broader community, so if you have a training clinic at a university and you have students that are practicing at the university clinic that are also out in practicum, then there's some relationship that has to occur between these different sites and these different institutions. And then we think about the societal or government level, particularly that has to do with regulation and policy. Right? So this seems, this is obviously a pretty broad range of scale, and what I argue to my design colleagues is that all of this touches everything we do. So even very low-level decisions about what to put in an interface wind up getting shaped by all of the dimensions here. And I'll try to give some examples of that in a second. The other piece, though, is that, again, as a designer, I don't have deep expertise in this field. Luckily, I work with some incredibly gifted and well-informed people, but it's not enough to just kind of imagine what might be or what might be needed. We tend to do a lot of work very closely with the sites where we are operating. So this is Mike Tanana, who's our Chief Technology Officer, interviewing an unnamed research participant. And I show this to say that, when we are developing technologies, we are spending a fair amount of time staring at computers and writing code and pushing pixels around, but we're also spending a lot of time with the sites where we're working. Really trying to understand what's motivating people who are using our technology, what are their needs and aspirations, and what are the constraints under which they're operating. And so I'll just show some of the interfaces that we currently are using, and I'll talk some of them we're developing. I'll just try to point out where what seems like a simple design decision actually winds up being reflected with a bunch of other concerns, right? So, and I think some of the people in the room have seen some versions of some of these, hopefully. But, so this is just a recording interface, right? So it's pretty straightforward. You've got a couch, or in theory it would be a clinician and a client, but it's a couch. And a button that says record. Great, easy peasy, right? And so as a designer, what do you need to do? Well, you need to make sure that this is easy enough that a clinician who may not have a lot of technical expertise or interest can make it work. No problem, right? Well, the other thing that we also have to think very carefully about is, what does it mean for the client who is going to be recorded? And it's one thing to do that at a place like University of Denver, where there's an expectation that sessions are being recorded or viewed. But some of the sites that we work at, that is not the expectation. So when we're working at an opioid treatment center in Seattle that doesn't have a tradition of recording, and a client population that might be experiencing paranoia, other kinds of issues, or might just have deep distrust of institutions and technology, how do you put a microphone in that room? What's the right way to do that? How do you make people feel okay about that? How do you develop, from an organizational standpoint, a consent procedure when you haven't had to do that before? Right? And so when we're designing these technologies, we're designing the technology, we're also looking at the design of the physical environment where things are happening, we're looking at some of the organizational practices that might be at play here. Right? And these things all kind of have to come together, and as a designer who was traditionally trained, this is all kind of new and exciting and a little scary, but that's all pretty good. You've seen the version of this, I've got little sketches, which is different. So this is our review screen here, right? So, you've got the playback window on the upper left there, you've got some notes and discussion that can happen just below it, and then to the right, you have that transcript view, right? So this is something that's coming online here, but it's an automatically generated transcription of the session. Super helpful, right? I mean, you can go and look at your sessions, you can search around for key things that happened, you can review each other's sessions. Super great, right? Awesome. What happens if someone decides they want to, review their own session on the bus or at a Starbucks. Or yeah, you're shaking your head, not a good idea, right? But someone has to remember to say, hey, that's not a good idea, please don't do that, right? And so that, again, these kinds of considerations of not just what's the technology, but what is the institutional context in which it's occurring, what are the policies that are put into place around that, becomes part of kind of the design space that we have to operate in. Here's our evaluation report, right? And so as David mentioned, we've got a bunch of different measures here, and we can't ignore them, right? And one of the questions that we ask ourselves as we're designing these is, so we're imagining these being used for feedback, right? It's helpful to get a sense of like, oh, you know what? I guess I'm trying to think what shows we actually have here. So percentage talk time. Well, it's nice to know that I'm actually not dominating the conversation. That's great. And that's a useful thing to be able to use as supervision. But when you think about this being used in a professional context, what happens if this starts getting used for things like performance reviews and performance evaluations, right? Is that an appropriate use of the kinds of technologies we're building? And do we need to make sure that we're putting kind of context around it so that administrators or potentially insurance payers can actually interpret these kinds of results appropriately and not just be kind of naively looking at a chart and saying, okay, this therapist is clearly no good at what they do, right? Additional concerns we have to bring to bear here. Here's our administrative view. So this allows a clinician to just see all of their clients and all of the sessions with the clients there. And you'll just notice, we've got this ability, I keep one thing. So you see the little trash can save thing there, right? So that simply says that, okay, when we record a session and it goes up on our platform, by default it sits there for 30 days or 45 days, and then it goes away, right? Or perhaps if you want to save it longer, that's an option, you can save it longer, right? So this is called data retention policy. It's not typically something that an individual gets to decide for themselves. And there gets to be a whole bunch of related concerns that come into it. There's the cost of storing data for long amounts of time. There are potential risks from holding on to patient data for long amounts of time that institutions may or may not want to take on. So again, when we're designing software, we're also helping to design policies that might be happening at an institutional level. More of the same on this one, I suppose. Okay, so then here's a couple of the features that we're working on now that some of you at least should start seeing turning up here, hopefully in January, we think. And I'll just mention them. So one is the ability to upload and download session files. So you can record a session not just using our platform, but using a camcorder or a handheld device or whatever, and then you can upload it into our platform, right? Super useful. And you can also download them to do other things with them. Super useful in some cases, but recognizing that, for example, the ability to download a session is both potentially problematic, but also in some cases driven by policy. Right? Depending on the state where you live, there may be requirements about retaining records, and the fact that this session has been recorded means that it is a record and therefore it must be kept, right? We as a company definitely don't want to keep it for very long. So that becomes a feature that we have to build in part because it's something that some of our users are interested in, but also because there are these regulatory environments in which we're operating. We're working on peer group support, so very easily being able to have a group of clinicians and supervisors that can share their sessions with each other, right? Really useful for supervision, but there's some challenges there to think through as well about what are the rules around which sessions may or may not be shared. Can you just share all of them? Can your peers see everything you do? Maybe you like that. Some clinicians won't, right? So again, it's software and it's policy altogether. And then live streaming is a similar kind of idea that we're also developing, so you'll be able to view each other's sessions as they're happening remotely and be adding commenting into that as well. Again, really exciting from one perspective, but really complicated when you think about the other kind of levels at which we're operating. So that's kind of all I have. That's sort of what we've been up to and what we're thinking about. And now Shri is going to talk about the big picture in the future. Thank you. Can you find it?
I got a clever title and a clever subtitle.
That's the one slide I reuse.
Let's see, where's the mouse? All right, so as promised. So you heard from my colleague Dave about who set this up and sort of the role of technologies in service of counseling particularly, and see how we can provide useful support both sort of for research but also sort of in dissemination and practice. And Tad provided you a view of how you can connect basically stakeholders together with these technologies, right? Because at the end you want to know how people can use it and put it to good use. So what I want to do is just to step back and see what are other possibilities that these kinds of advances that are happening in the field, in the broad field of engineering and technology, can afford us. Particularly, no one can escape these days, hearing about machine learning or AI or sensing and so on. I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. So in general, our work, Dave and myself and other colleagues have been over the last 10 plus years, been thinking about how can we use sort of these kinds of methodologies to get a little bit more into understanding the human condition and hopefully, develop sort of useful tools that can perhaps support, human experiences. And while doing so, we wanted to answer some of the basic practical things like can we provide scale, right? Can it reach many people? Can we do this in an economical way? That is, and these are sort of questions that people constantly ask. And so for us to actually take ideas from sort of a laboratory, from research, to actually real world, the kind of gathering that we are doing right now is an essential part. So with that backdrop, right, I just want to step back. You saw some of the statistics that Dave shared about counseling and both the kind of impact it has on society and also the burden it creates, both economic and other way. This is true across sort of many conditions, lifespan. Everything from developmental sort of neurodevelopmental conditions like autism to other things like MCI, dementia, Alzheimer's, and so on. And each of it is like the prevalence ratings is like fairly staggering. And so the question is, do we have enough sort of capacity as to first of all address this? If so, how can we do it effectively and continuously? So this is where we thought, what role can engineering and technologies play, right? We know that, in the last even 10 years, how this device got what we call a cell phone, right, which was originally used for people talking to one another, right, pretty much transformed the whole world, right? We entertain ourselves, we do commerce, we do all kinds of things with this. Likewise, imagine the kinds of things that are happening around the world. So the question to ask, natural question is how can we bring these kinds of intelligence, and technologies in support of, clinical decision making, dissemination, and also assuring that what you intend to treat your clients is actually what is happening, and can you assure can track. So the way, at least I think about it, is technologies can have these three roles. One, people know, experts over years of science and scholarship know what to do, but perhaps technology can support by providing sort of, as I said, do things more efficiently, can record lots of data, analyze things, and which we don't need to do humans sit and observe and so on, so provide efficiency, consistency, and so on. That's great. Right? The second thing is actually very exciting, right? Because constantly we're learning about this complex thing we call as humans, right? And how we change to create new tools and insights, tools for discovery. And I think that's very exciting, providing quantitative sort of objective ways of thinking about the human condition, what happens under various specific sort of etiologies, etc. And of course, then we want to translate that into effective assessment methodologies, effective delivery of interventions, but also knowing how to track response to treatments, because that's one of the big needs. So to do this in our own research over the years, we've been using specific use cases or domains to actually help us understand. These are some domains where I've had the privilege of working along, and this is just a reminder slide, sort of a summary of what Dave presented. Addiction treatment has been one domain that we've been working on. Big questions on what works, for whom, how, and why are some of the basic drivers. To do that, we've been focusing on specific schools of therapy, like motivation interviewing, and trying to understand from both the clinical side what are the things that are being looked at, trying to create objective, computational ways of, quantifying that, but also sort of expanding that to get insights into things like, empathy was mentioned, right? How do we even begin to quantify the expression of empathy? How is that process? How do you actually begin to understand the dynamics of interaction between a client and their provider, right? Things like entrainment. So kinds of things that are open up the possibilities. We've been doing that there. We can skip that. The other domain where this is more on the counseling side. The other side is the domain of assessment, where again we have experts working with their patients to understand and trying to characterize them so that they can design what kind of personalized treatment that they can offer. Right? Autism is well known, a neurogenetic condition, high prevalence, 1 in 59 now this year, rating. Imagine the number of people that is needed to actually experts are needed to see these children, let alone sort of track them over development and interventions, right? So engineering technologies can help connect dots here, can help provide support for these experts. So we've been trying to work on, see how we can use these kinds of technology. I'll say a little more later about characterizing things like of interest are things like joint attention, sort of turn-taking patterns, shared enjoyment. These are things that an expert's looking for. Can we actually build technologies? So what you saw in the inset is actually, a parent and a child doing storytelling together, right? That's an interesting paradigm. But in the inset, what you saw was you see their speech patterns automatically, the algorithms picking who's talking when, things like nonverbal cues like laughter. All these can be sort of, inventory and have as part of the transcript. Then you can go look at the moments of shared enjoyment. Is there an opportunity where they should have laughed together? So these are the objective things that are accessible in addition to the impressionistic thing that the clinician will have while they're watching this particular session. So in addition, right, in autism, as many of you know, there are things that are not visible or audible like in a typical way, like social anxiety levels, right? Maybe they're unfamiliar circumstance, or maybe that day is not a good day for the child. Can you also get access to physiological arousal, for example, from a wristband? So what technology can do is help provide, reconcile all this together and offer it to the experts, right? And in fact, here we had wristband of both the parent and the child, so you can see when they're aligning together, when they're diverging, and so you can see, their own entrainment or lack thereof. So these kinds of possibilities are there. Of course, this is just a familiar take that people know from ADAS, which is Autism Diagnostic Algorithm Schedule. So we've been using ADAS as one of our platforms to actually trying to automate some of these assessment methodologies, like things like atypical prosody, conversation, all those various dimensions in such an assessment. So another domain that Dave and I share a common interest and worked on for a long time is like now understanding human interactions in general. Right? Many of our things like where it's not directly therapy, but clinicians are supporting. They're watching people, couples, for example. They're interested in things like constructs like characterizing affective dynamics, blame patterns, humor, affect, etc. Again, the question is, can you build algorithms or technologies to track these kinds of things directly from audio and video and language use, so that you have, again, a summary report like what Dad was sharing, and how you use it, it depends on the purpose of the researcher and the clinician. So here's an example of here, normally approach avoidance type of a thing. So we've worked on these kinds of things. The final thing, one big project that we've been working on is kinds of things not in the more conventional mental health research area, but more workplace, right? Because imagine a workplace is a very complex domain. Your competing demands of that have cognitive elements, social elements, emotional aspects, such as in a health place. The question is how can you see how people regulate these competing demands and do well, and how does it relate to performance measure? So again, technology is like playing a big role where we can get unobtrusive measures of social interaction, movement, emotions, etc. It's again a big project that we're working on. In all these cases, right? So what we're trying to do is use these computational advances to be able to detect, classify and track various sort of constructs of interest, whether it is how much someone is talking, or who's interacting with whom, or how empathic are they presenting themselves, to their interlocutor. All these are sort of, made possible by access to data. The easy data to access are, one that we can measure with the microphone, very easy, or camera in these cases, and sometimes, psychophysiological signals. Each case is what this, what signal processing is basically what it parses this signal, that is audio signal or video signal. And machine learning tries to find patterns in these kinds of data. And with which you can ask questions, who does this data belong to? What are they doing? What was spoken, for example, from audio? All these things can be done. And these are advances that are happening in AI. And so in the field right now, in the general community, people are now working on the whole spectrum of possibilities by devising sort of new wearable sensing to instrumenting spaces. Like, for example, clinics of the future. How do we imagine? Already, right? Like it's pretty high tech compared to most clinics, right? You have, but trying to imagine this. How can technology support this kind of access to information? What do you do with that information you gather, right? That data, which sort of understanding of what is being said and who's involved, what's going on, to many other kinds of more abstract constructs like affect. There's like a huge area in engineering, affective computing, tries to model people's express emotion state, how people process emotions, and other kinds of nonverbal social cues like smiles, laughters, and even towards sarcasm or irony type of things. Right? People are trying to do these kinds of things. So just to translate just our recording setup that we saw, tying everything together, what Dave and Pat showed. You record a dialogue, and there's audio waveform. You extract a lot of information. You process the audio using all these algorithms, with which you can answer, where is their speech. That's called voice activity detection, right? In an audio stream. Then once you know who does the speech belong to, you can ask that question automatically by recognition. Once you know that, then what are they saying? Automatic speech recognition. Nowadays with Alexa, Siri, all these are becoming very commoditized, which is great. We can also ask more.
This has been going on just for 2 days, is that right?
You can ask more questions than just words. You can ask, you can guess what the sort of age of the person who's speaking it, but also not all words are created sort of, with the same importance. when we speak, we put prominence in certain words, right? We emphasize certain things, which will change the meaning. We group certain things together, certain way to packetize how we want to convey information. All these can be figured out. It's encoded in that audio and language. So we have algorithms that work on these kinds of things, guessing the act, like what kind of communicative act are they asking a question? Is it an open question, closed question, etc. So the final point I want to make before closing this talk is like, I said that a lot of this technologies, at least in our view, is in the service of people that are going to be using it. In our case here in a clinical setting, clinicians, the clients, and the other people that are involved in this whole ecosystem, right? So having these humans in the center of this particular technology loop is an important view that we have, right? Typically when we do sort of, traditionally see how well a session went, right? We have a specific way of, there's some constructs that we think are important. We got to look for it. Adherence to a particular therapy protocol, or specific aspects of client behavior or provider behavior, like empathy is again an example we use, right? So people have experts like Dr. Grimlord, have ways of actually characterizing this from data and mapping it. What machines try to do is learn what such experts do from the data that they have seen, right? Learn these patterns, and that's the thing. You see in this tool, human evaluator judge. And use the machines try to emulate or imitate this and try to get these algorithms built. Now what we can do is a little more. Machines can do certain things in a very mind-numbing way. Look at small twitches in facial expression or inflection in the voice or word usage over a long time that we may not have the ability to cognitive capacity or perceptual sort of patience to look at, right? Machines can keep track of it. Now together will they add value more than just by themselves, right? This is a question that we ask a lot. So we can feed back what the machine thought back to the experts. They can say, well, this makes sense, it doesn't make sense, type of thing. Together they can learn, and this kind of collaborative machine and human intelligence is something that we really thrive for. And I think this is important. So the phrase I like and use a lot is to support and supplant human expert analysis. We always feel that technology is as good as how we want it to be used and how it should be used by people. So in summary, right, so what I tried to sort of bring together, we had an initial example, this addiction counseling framework where we have sort of carried through some of these ideas of using, gathering and using sort of interesting information about a session, feeding it back to the people in service of, both understanding how well the session went and help provide feedback. Now, these kinds of ideas can be sort of broadened, can be applied across, areas in sort of mental health research and practice, and, maybe as simple as just automating some steps that are just plainly boring for humans to do, to actually creating very innovative, new, novel tools of thinking about, understanding human condition. Thank you for your attention.
So I think we do have a few minutes for questions. We'd be happy to field any and all.
Any questions?
Hi. Well, okay. My name is John. I'm a faculty member here. My mind is blown. This is awesome. And scary at the same time. So I was reflecting, because as I was reflecting on my own therapeutic alliance with clients I worked with, I think that I might have been able to score high on this, even though maybe the dynamic was a little off, and sometimes it's off because of, I'm not digging deep in terms of multicultural kind of putting at the forefront, and I'm just wondering, have you been looking at those variables?
Let me make one sort of general comment, which is there is increasingly news and information about AI, and not all of it is good. And some of that is we're seeing examples where AI models are trained and then they're starting to be rolled out, and then they're doing really not what they're supposed to be doing. And there's been bias that's been built into them. And so I think one of the things that we kind of continually want to be asking ourselves is, is what we think we are capturing and presenting truly correct, right? Is that calibrated to what human evaluators would be able to do? And one of the biggest issues there is, how generalizable are the models that we have? And so when we say that, we have trained models that can identify empathy, well, that is from a particular set of data that we have collected, we have access to, and has been rated. That does not automatically translate. So, for instance, not too long ago, we had someone who was interested in, or directly involved in, motivational interviewing in the juvenile justice system. And so, does motivational interviewing from addiction treatment and the coding and kind of all that model training, is that going to translate into juvenile justice setting? And so I think that's one of the things that we need to kind of keep asking, and we're actively thinking about. To your specific question, we are actively looking at both therapeutic alliance as well as kind of multicultural questions. So that's work that is ongoing, so it's not baked into the system yet. But at some point in the not too distant future, we would be at an ability to add that as additional metrics. So it's like, here's a rating of empathy, here's a rating of multicultural sensitivity, here's a rating of working alliance.
So what I noticed in what your coding is aligned to is for MI, and I'm just wondering if you investigated applying it to other counseling techniques.
You want to field it?
Yes. Dr. Grin-Lord.
Grin Lord is our close colleague who heads up all coding stuff.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. That's like our next step is to make a translational coding system for all therapies. So common factors, CBT, so we need a lot of parent-child stuff. So that's kind of our next thing. A lot of the core skills in MI at process level are in many different coding systems anyway, so we already have a great foundation, but that's kind of, we're in process of doing that. We want to kind of nail some of these things like recognizing speakers and making sure all of that is correct, and as soon as we're perfect on that, then we're going to kind of expand to these other things, but absolutely, that's kind of the next step.
So one thing you can also think about is like, so just from top down view, you can take this coding view, right, that we are characterizing a particular thing like MI, CBT, DBT, whatever it is, that we test a specific flavor, that we're looking for specific sort of constructs that are related. And then from the low level, right, we look at things like, talk time, how much, time does clients spend compared to the providers, and how many questions are they asking, things that are more conversational, interaction oriented. So it's kind of, it can come from both these top down and bottom up approach. And the generalization that Grin was mentioning is the kind of thing, how can you translate across these schools? And then while being supported by these kinds of more objective measures of just the interaction, that session and over time.
Thanks for presenting, and I guess I have a two-part question. One being, will there be a way to determine if clients are withholding, knowing that they're being recorded and it's being transcribed, and maybe they won't go as deeply as they would if they weren't in a room the microphone was in? And secondly, if we had our records subpoenaed by someone, would this be part of it where instead of keeping a vague note of what took place in therapy, there is this very detailed outline transcription that would maybe be included in those records?
Let's see, question one was yes. So I think that's an open question for us in terms of, and I think where the specific example that immediately comes to mind is the opioid treatment program that we're working with in Seattle. So that's not a training clinic. They have not had a recording workflow or protocol. And so we have spent a lot of time working with them. They are as a clinic and organization, very interested in recording to enhance their own kind of quality assurance and quality monitoring and supervision. But it's new and it's different for everybody in the entire organization. So we've really been working kind of with leadership, with the counseling staff, and indirectly via the counseling staff with patients. And so they've had to develop a patient consent form. They have had to approach patients for the first time about their willingness to be recorded. And so, you know, what I would say is that for the most part, that has been a positive process. But in terms of whether that affects the counseling itself, I think that's an open question. In terms of the subpoena piece, absolutely. And that is something that we are actively thinking about, both kind of from our business interest side of things, but as Tad was alluding, you know, it's really a conversation that we are having with sites about how long do you want to keep this data where it's named and it could be open to discovery legally. And that's, I mean, for any clinic or individual that does recording at all, that's the issue. It's not specific to us, but we're trying to think very thoughtfully about how we can help guide, and in some cases, I think, proactively engage sites in the conversation about what are the pros and cons of retaining data. Obviously, as soon as you delete it, then it also loses its clinical value for supervision or training or whatnot.
All right. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you all for being here. Welcome me, or welcome, help me thank the listeners. That's not going to look good on the transcript. That's for sure. Thank you all for being here.